Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to our program today. This is one of in an ongoing series presented by the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, an organization, coalition of rabbis from across the country who are devoted to promoting Jewish unity and solidarity with Israel, and whose work is especially important at a time such as this. I just want to remind our listeners, people who are participating, of a couple of important things before we get started with this important program today. Number one, we have issued a rabbinic letter of support and solidarity and unity for Israel. It opens with the words, "Our hearts are broken and our souls are grieving. As rabbis from different denominations and movements, we do not all share the same beliefs, practices, or theology, yet at this critical time we are united in our sorrow. And in our resolve to stand with our brothers and sisters in Israel who are fighting to defend themselves." If you haven't yet had a chance to sign that, participate and be listed, we have close to 1,000 who have already signed. Please do, and please feel free to share it with others as well, so that we can have as many joining us. In just a few moments, we will be putting in the chat the link to that letter, and there it is now. Today's conversation, which is being recorded and will be posted on our website, is a very important one. We're calling it "All Hell's Breaking Out on College Campuses. How can rabbis help, and how should we and can we respond?" And we have three very talented individuals who are with us as our participants, our panelists today. We have with us Lauren Suriel. Lauren is the National Field Director of the Israel on Campus Coalition. ICC is how it's referred to by many. And in that context, their mission is to inspire American college students to see Israel as a source of pride and empower them to stand up for Israel on campus. We also have with us today, as our one of our guests is and experts is Alyza Lewin. Alyza is the head of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for I'm going to make sure I get it right, for human rights under the law. She's a passionate advocate and great spokesperson for the legal rights that exist, and so we will be hearing from her. And then our third guest today is Carly Gammil. Carly is with the Standwithus organization, and she is the director of the Standwithus Center for Combating Antisemitism. And as a result, she has extensive experience in this area. And with that, we're going to go straight to our panelists with one other caveat. I just want to be sure that everyone is aware of the fact that this coming a week from today, next Tuesday, at the same time, hopefully, we will look forward to seeing as many of you as possible in Washington, D.C. for the massive rally that's being called on the Capitol grounds as a opportunity of support for Israel. With that, now let me start with Lauren and ask you if you please share with us what is your sense of what's happening on college campuses? What are you hearing from college students? And then giving us both the overview and then any specific examples of what is of concern to so many of us. Lauren?
Sure. Thank you, Rabbi Weinblatt, for having me. Great to be here with you all today, although sorry that it's under these circumstances. I know it's been a really long month for everyone. And, you know, it's really been one of the most challenging months that I've ever experienced doing this work in almost a decade now. And particularly for college students, they are feeling frightened, scared. They're feeling really alone. I mean, we're hearing all day long from students from across the country that they don't know where to turn. Many of them, we had some of our strongest student leaders on campuses across the country, talking to our regional directors and telling them, they're struggling even just to get out of bed and do it another day. And I certainly, resonate with that feeling. Our mission at ICC, like Rabbi mentioned, is to inspire students to see Israel as a source of pride on campus. And I think if we want to take one thing from the last month, though, as difficult as it's been, I think it has also been really, really clarifying for students, really clarifying in what they value and really clarifying in who they can count on. So if we want to say something positive, I think that's a positive. It's been really hard, and I'll talk about, I know many of you are seeing all the incidents happening day after day after day across the country, but I'll just kind of like put them into a couple of boxes that we're seeing trend wise. So there's incidents happening in the classroom. So at Stanford University, or earlier this month, there was a faculty member who had the Jewish students in the classroom stand up and identify themselves, and then basically had them move into a corner of the room and stand there separated from their peers, and said, basically, this is what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. Just yesterday, actually, I talked to one of our, senior fellows at Indiana University who, we took to Israel and to the UAE last year. It was like a, real like, okay, it's a moment where we're bringing everyone together. And he was called out in a classroom because of his involvement with AIPAC, called out in front of all these peers, and in a really, really nasty way, basically saying that he had been brainwashed by AIPAC, things like that. This is happening in the classroom. And these are just two examples, but it's happening, we're hearing reports after reports from students about professors really leading the charge in the classroom. So that's one area where I think it's been very concerning. In the public square on campus, student papers refusing to publish pro-Israel op-eds. They'll publish, these kind of pro-Hamas op-eds, but when a Jewish or a pro-Israel student tries to respond, they're, either dragging their feet, they're telling them, oh, we'll get back to you with edits, and then they draw it out, and some of them are refusing to publish at all. And Standwithus, I know, is actually doing a little bit of an initiative around that, which is great. Also, protests like over and over again, and they started, by the way, on October 8th. On October 7th, while this attack against Israel was unfolding, the National SJP chapter posted online that today we saw a historic win. And I've been doing this work for a long time, and even I was surprised by how disgusting the rhetoric was. So for me, it was a very clarifying moment, and I think it was for our students as well. And SJP chapters around the country started answering that call, started scheduling these protests right away before the Israeli response had even begun. So that's certainly something, obviously, we've been seeing, and the protests keep happening. On Thursday of this week, there's going to be another nationwide student walkout where students are going to leave the classroom in support of, against Israel. And some of these protests are turning violent. At Tulane University, there was a student who was assaulted. Just this past week at UMass Amherst, a student was assaulted. So it's really kind of a ticking time bomb on campus. All these protests are getting very, very nasty. National SJP has also been calling for their student groups to launch divestment BDS campaigns, and we're seeing a number of them issue that call. Arizona State has a vote next week on the 14th, actually, that lines up with the day of the march in DC. They'll be having a vote on BDS at Arizona State. One positive, and I know Alyza will probably talk about this, is that some universities are starting to step up. I think it's been so clarifying for some people that, we saw Brandeis University yesterday decided to de-recognize the SJP chapter on campus. And I know I met with a university president last week, and he told me, they were going to take a look at their, their guidelines for student organization. So I think it's something that people are really starting to take seriously. So that's just kind of a rundown of a few of the things we're seeing. And what we're trying to do is give students as much support as possible. We're giving them funding for programming. We're even helping students if they need to get to DC for next Tuesday, because we feel like being in community right now is what we're hearing over and over that students really need. It's just really challenging, and we're connecting them to our partners like Alyza, like Carly, and the Standwithus team wherever we can. We're really just triaging and drinking from a fire hose. So That's just a little overview of what we're doing and how we're thinking about things.
Thank you, Lauren. Very much appreciate that. Let me ask either Carly or Alyza, any sense of where all of this hatred is coming from? Is this spontaneous? Is it organized? If so, where is, is the old adage follow the money appropriate in this? What do you guys think about that? Carly, looks like you unmuted. Go ahead. And then Alyza, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, where's this hate coming from? This is a centuries old hate. This is not new. It's tempting to want to say this is new because it looks maybe a little different, right? October 7th looked very different from anything we've seen in Israel. The celebrations of it, the glorification of it look much more intense than anything maybe we've seen on campuses before. But the underlying hatred is it's anti-Semitism 101. It's Hamas charter. It's wipe the Jews off the face of the planet. I mean, it's not anything new, and it's entirely coordinated, as Lauren mentioned. The National Students for Justice in Palestine, which oversees and connects, rather is probably a better word, the student chapters on campuses across the country, put out a toolkit. Right. And as Lauren said, the rhetoric is disgusting, but it's honest about who they are. Right. I mean, we've all heard the old adage, when someone tells you who they are, believe them. If we ever heard Hamas say who they are, we now have no reason to do anything but believe them. And NSJP and its student chapters are just carrying out that. And it's not just on campuses. I know we're here to talk about campuses, but this is spilling over into the community as well. With what we're seeing at community rallies and things like that. So again, I can't underscore enough that this is age old. This is not new. It
certainly seems to be so much better organized and coordinated. Maybe it has to do with that SJP national thing that you're referring to.
Yeah, their messaging has always been very organized and consistent. Again, it's one of the challenges that we've always had in this space, right? Is that our opponent has been so organized, so consistent. They've got Jewish Voice for Peace, which just tokenizes the connection to the Jewish community and says, oh, even Jews agree with us, right? So they've got multiple organizations, but they also have this decades-long intersectionality on campus that they work through, right? This idea of all of the oppressed minorities come together and stand against the oppressor, and the one group that doesn't get to be a part of that, the one minority group that doesn't get to be a part of that because we don't see them as the oppressed, but rather as the oppressor, are the Jews, who are viewed in connection to Israel as the colonizer, the oppressor, the occupier. And so every other group on campus that considers themselves a targeted minority, an oppressed minority, comes together under this kind of social justice type banner. And this has been fomenting for years and years and years. But the underlying hate, it's Hamas. And I'm going to stop there because I know Alyza has a lot.
Alyza, please jump in this, please, and help us also understand a little bit what is the distinction between what is permissible and what might not be. What is the difference between free speech and hate speech? And then in that context, also anti-Semitism anti-Zionism seeping into anti-Semitism. If you could share some of that, please.
So it honestly frustrates me terribly when people talk about this situation as a speech issue, because that's been part of the problem for years now on campus, is that administrators have mistakenly thought that what they were witnessing was a good faith political debate, and that this was a matter of speech. And on one side you would have pro-Palestinian speech, and on the other side you'd have pro-Israeli speech. That's not what has been taking place on the campuses for these past more than a decade even. What's been happening on the campuses actually is this constant diet that has been fed to students of anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish hate. It has been a consistent effort to demonize the Jew. And if you understand anti-Semitism 101, as Carly was saying, if you realize that what anti-Semitism does, no matter the century, is that it always scapegoats the Jew. The Jew is always to blame for whatever that generation, whatever that society views as its misfortune, as its evil. The Jew is the one to blame. And the way it plays out is that the idea is that the Jew should then be ostracized, should be segregated, should be shunned and excluded and denied his place in society. Think about the Yellow Star of David, right, that the Nazis had the Jews wear. The idea was that you saw somebody with that, you did not engage with that person. You didn't use them as your lawyers or your doctors. They were to be shunned. And the difference between the Holocaust and today is that today we actually have a Jewish nation state. And so it's not only individual Jews who are being denied their place in society. Today there's a concerted effort to blame the Jewish nation state for today's evil, right? There are those today who will say, which is the country that's the world's worst offender when it comes to human rights violations? And they don't list Iran or China or Russia or any of these other, North Korea, right? They list the Jewish state, right? Because suddenly that Jewish state is the one that's responsible for today's evil. And the idea is, let's deny that Jewish state its place in the society of nations, right? Only the Jewish state is suggested that it has no right to exist. That's what you have now with these demonstrations on campuses. The idea that we don't want no two states, we want all of it, is what they say, right? We do not believe that the Jewish state has a right to exist at all in any borders whatsoever. This is pushing the Jews out of their place in society and suggesting to the world, you know what, world? We think the world would be a better place without the Jews, without the Jewish nation state, without Israel. That would solve all our problems. That would, right? We wouldn't have the colonizers, we wouldn't have the oppressors. Think about it. When the Nazis targeted the Jews, they viewed the Jews as the ultimate race polluters. They certainly did not see Jews as white. And today, right? Today, suddenly all Jews, it doesn't matter what their backgrounds, whether they came from Arab lands or not, all Jews are considered white. Why? Because white is the equivalent of oppressors. White is the equivalent of evil. White are the white supremacists. So suddenly there's a hyper whiteness to Jews. This is all part of today's contemporary anti-Semitism. And yet the real problem we have is that people today, many of them don't yet recognize it as anti-Semitism.
So let's talk then about what kind of recourse there is. A question open to any of the three of you. In other words, for our college students who are facing this kind of intimidation, the bullying, and or even the violence, and or the intimidation by their teachers, it certainly seems like they are up against, you know, these are nice Jewish kids, most of them from the suburbs, most of them don't necessarily have encountered any of this stuff. Some of them do get sucked into it. What are the kinds of things, what recourse do they have? What kind of things should we be recommending that they do in these situations? Who wants to take that one first?
So I'll just say universities have a legal obligation to protect our students from this harassment and discrimination. One of the main tools we use is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which applies to almost every university in the country because it applies to every entity that receives federal government funds.
And what does Title VI say? How does that work for this?
So what Title VI says is that if you are receiving these government funds, you have to make sure that all the opportunities you provide are provided on a non-discriminatory basis. And so you can't allow discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin. And if you have students who are being denied this equal educational opportunity, they can file a Title VI complaint and the universities could lose their federal government funding. The one catch, though, that I have to say, particularly relevant to this audience, is that Title VI does not include religion as a protected category. So the question has come up, well, how do you protect Jews? How do you protect members of any faith-based groups? And what has been established now, and it started actually back in 2004, Ken Marcus, who's the one who founded the Brandeis Center, established what's become known as the Marcus Doctrine, where he basically said that when members of faith-based groups, and at that point he established it when he was heading the Office for Civil Rights in the Department of Education. He was then the acting assistant secretary for civil rights. And the issue came up, this was after 9/11, whether Muslims and Sikhs who were being mistaken for Muslims, who were being discriminated against, could file complaints with the Department of Education. And he said, yes, if there are religious groups that are being discriminated against on the basis of one of these other categories, their race, their national ethnic origin, basically their shared ancestry or ethnicity, they are also protected by Title VI. So when you think about it as Jews, what is the Jewish shared ancestry and ethnicity, right? Our ancestral heritage is linked to the land of Israel. You can't separate the Jewish ancestral heritage from this land. You can't. And so if Jews define their Jewish identity as including this affiliation, right, this feeling for Israel, inevitably that's coming as an expression of their Jewish identity.
But are we not an ethnic people? And didn't the Trump administration do something to expand this to include Jews?
So it's what the Trump administration did is it took this understanding of Title VI, it elevated it to from a sub-regulatory guidance, basically, of the Department of Education, Department of Justice, up to the level of an executive order, and it linked it to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. So what the 2019 executive order on combating anti-Semitism did is it said, if you are faced with a complaint alleging anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination, how do you know what anti-Semitism is? You use the IRA definition. So to this day, the Department of Education is following the executive order. In fact, they have frequently asked questions about the executive order as guidance on their Department of Education website. And just in their most recent guidance letter today, they referred to that again as active guidance. And so when they are investigating these complaints, they are using the IRA definition of anti-Semitism to understand what anti-Semitism is.
Thank you. Carly, can you add to it a little bit, please? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. And I want to go back to something that you asked and Alyza kind of started to get into, which is this idea of free speech, what's protected, what's not, and how does that intersect with Title VI? Because a lot of people get really confused about that. And so as Alyza said, Title VI is a tremendously important tool that we have in our arsenal as attorneys, and honestly, not even attorneys. You don't have to be an attorney to use Title VI. It's a tremendous opportunity for Jewish students to seek protection under the law. But what I want to emphasize here is that, and Alyza alluded to this and said it, in fact, in so many words, what's happening on college campuses right now is not a matter of political speech, your view versus my view, right? Is there some speech mixed in with what's happening that maybe is protected? Offensive speech, is protected under the First Amendment. We know that, right? But what's happening right now is crossing the line in so many different situations. From, it's not just speech, it's not just dialogue, it's not just my view, and then the answer to that, to speech with which we disagree is more speech, right? Counter speech. That's the way that the First Amendment and free speech is supposed to work. What students and even some professors on campus are doing right now is crossing the line into harassment, intimidation of students, right? When they get together in a rally on a campus and start chanting, and when I say chanting, I mean, if you watch some of these videos, you will see the vitriol and the anger and the hatred, right? This is not just, I want to share my political view. This is fomenting, inciting violence, and it's leading, as Lauren said, on some campuses to actual violence. And they're chanting things like, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, right? So it's not just, we want better things for the Palestinian people. It's, as Alyza said, it is, we want the Jewish people, including the Jewish state, wiped off the face of the earth. And we are presenting this idea in a way that is not about dialogue, right? It is about intimidating Jewish and Israeli students on campus. It is in your face, it is harassment. And so when you cross the line from merely sharing your view, right, protected speech, into harassment and discriminatory treatment, and certainly into violence, right? That's when you get into the realm of Title VI, of saying, okay, we're no longer just talking about you're sharing your view, I'm sharing my view, and there's nothing I can do, I can't silence your view. Under Title VI, harassment can be purely speech, but it's the manner in which that speech is put forth, right? Like I said, in a harassing and an intimidating, in a violent manner that matters. And so when all of that's happening rises to the level of a pervasively hostile environment, and trust me, the three of us have seen there are pervasively hostile environments on campuses across the country because of what's happening, that's when Title VI allows you to step in and say, administration, you have an obligation now to act. And so that's what we are doing, our organization, Alyza's organization, many others, in conjunction with many pro bono attorneys, who are stepping up to the challenge and saying, look, we know that there's more work to go around here than any of you can do on your own. And so, we're preparing those types of complaints.
So in just a few moments, I'm going to ask about some of the specific things that are being done. But I want to go over to Lauren for a second. Alyza, feel free to jump back in afterwards. But Lauren, in terms of the intimidation of students on campus, usually I think it's sometime in the spring when a lot of campuses, these organizations have an Israel apartheid week, and they set up walls, or they set up give eviction notices to kids on their dorm rooms and so on. Are you finding that is something that kids are feeling intimidated about? And if so, again, we'll get to the legal stuff in a moment, but what are some of the things that you're hearing, and then how are are there any effective responses to any of this stuff?
Yeah, so just kind of also going back to the previous
Please.
question as well, something that I've noticed working with students is the issue is they're not always reporting things because they don't know how to. And so what we try to do is when we connect with a student, we help them try to navigate, like, where do they need to go? Because students aren't necessarily set up to understand how to navigate what on a lot of these campuses are overcomplicated levels of administrative, you know, layers to be able to, submit a bias incident report, and so forth. So when something happens, they don't even know what to do. So we really try to help them first, triage and say, okay, do we need to send you to Alyza or Carly, or, is it something else that we need? It's something, maybe a professor issue that we need to figure out something else, or we need to submit that bias incident report so we know it's on the record. So we try to help them, first of all, kind of triage and see what kind of support they really need, and where should we be sending them. So that's the first thing. And I think, like, yeah, I mean, students are feeling very intimidated. It seems like every day, like I said, there's a new nationwide walkout on Thursday, but it seems like every day there's a new day of resistance or day of rage or whatever. And, it's just really reaching a fever pitch. And I mean, students are exhausted. Of course, they're feeling intimidated. There are others who, I just heard there's a university who's going to vote on a bill next week about, not working with Zionist students on campus. And so, I mean, these are a real concerted effort, not to protest Israel, it's to boycott Jews. And we have to be really, really clear about that. So yeah, they're feeling intimidated because they are being targeted, not because of Israel or any of its policies, but because they are Jews.
Okay, so
If
speaking.
I just want to,
Yeah,
just
okay.
one point that Lauren made, which is really important. It's not always a good thing to turn around and file a bias complaint with the university's bias complaint system. And it sounds counterintuitive, but if the situation really would warrant a formal Title VI complaint, an administrative complaint to the Department of Education, one of the issues is that the way the Department of Education helps clear its docket is if it feels that there's some other entity that's investigating that same set of facts, it will not investigate, and then it will not second guess the university's conclusions. And so one of the problems that we have, and we haven't touched on this here, is that very often now these offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion on the university campuses do not understand Jewish identity. They do not understand anti-Semitism, and they are not particularly helpful or responsive when these students go to try and file these complaints. And so the students do not get a satisfactory response by filing those complaints. But if they file the complaints, then they often sometimes preclude our ability to go to the Department of Education, which would be able to put that pressure on the university to actually take steps to address the anti-Semitism. So when Lauren says, where should they go? Part of the reason is because oftentimes what we really want is for the student to make sure the university has notice, but not through the formal bias complaint system. They should be sending an email to the appropriate dean, letting the dean know about it, or some other administrator who would be the appropriate administrator so that the university knows and is put on notice, and therefore then has an obligation to respond to the anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination, but not necessarily by using the formal bias complaint system.
Okay, so we are for rabbis, they get a call from their college kid, or from a kid of theirs who goes to college, or from a parent. My kid is on campus, and he's reporting some of the things you referred to. What are the steps that we should recommend? What specifically, and if you want to put anything in the chat as to whom, Ghostbusters, who are you going to call? What do we do?
So
one of the things. Go ahead, Carly.
There's we've said this before, there's so much work to go around. So Alyza just put in the chat the helpline that they've established through a network. Standwithus has also an incident reporting mechanism that I've put in the chat. Lauren has put in the chat. The reality is, get them to one of us, right? We may very well end up all working together on these things. get them to one of us. We have a legal department at Standwithus. The Brandeis Center is doing legal work. ICC is providing support. Sometimes it depends upon the nature of the situation. I mean, obviously, if it's a criminal act, if there is an assault, the police need to be called immediately. Our organizations come in second to that, right? That we need to make sure that kids are safe. But if there's an incident that doesn't involve an emergency or an assault or something like that, like I said, reach out to Standwithus, to the Brandeis Center, to ICC. Any or all of us, and we will, we are all groups of limited resources, and so we don't want to be in a position where Alyza starts working on something and then finds out that that same student has come to Standwithus, and we're working with them. So again, this is not a time when we can afford to try to be competitive. There are students who are experiencing, as the name of this program indicates, hell on campus, and our role, our commitment is to help them with that, all of our roles. So as long as they get to one of us, they're going to end up in the right place, eventually, in order to be able to, as Lauren said, we're going to triage this, and we're going to figure out, is this a Title VI case? Is this something that we can deal with the administration directly and get a resolution to? So again, I think it's just really important to know that these resources we're all available, for that. We each, Standwithus and the Brandeis Center, each have attorneys at the ready to meet with students and to begin legal proceedings, but not all students want to do legal proceedings, right? Some of them want to, lay as low as possible. And especially right now, even though things are being really clarified, as Lauren said, that doesn't necessarily mean that they all have instantly overnight become, wannabe activists. And so again, we can help them navigate what their options are depending upon what their, preferences are and how they want to handle that.
How are things being coordinated? If I'm not mistaken, right before the call, one of you had mentioned to me that there is now a consortium. And then a follow-up question I'm going to ask is, some of us may have a couple of lawyers in our congregations, one or two. Are you looking for extra legal help in any of this?
Yeah. So in an effort to try to bring all of these various efforts together, the Anti-Defamation League and the Brandeis Center and Hillel launched yesterday this helpline, which if you go to www.legal-protection.org, you will find there's a short form there. And what's happened is there are a host of law firms that are volunteering. We've also been getting more requests from lawyers who wish to volunteer. The way it works is that short form gets completed and then a lawyer will contact the student. And our plan is to not only be able to provide those students with excellent free legal advice and guidance, but as the law firms that are volunteering as part of that network, and as the law firms that are working with Carly's network, and as the law firms that are working with some of these other groups, our plan is to try to pull together in communication all these lawyers so that all our efforts will be coordinated and working in the same.
Picking up on something that was mentioned a little while ago, there are issues when a kid may feel, oh my God, I'm being denied the opportunity to write a letter to the editor, and or my teacher is calling me out, which are really very grave violations of individual rights, civil rights, however you want to put. And then there's the more casual kinds of things, being spat upon, being intimidated verbally, or things like that, where they might not think, oh well, I'm not going to necessarily pursue this in a legal fashion. So a step down below that, what are some of the other either strategies and or recourse and resources? Carly?
Yeah, I just add in, certainly as Alyza said, there are the legal options that are available. And I want to say I think this is really important, just based on the question, specifically the way you asked it in the example that you gave, Rabbi, being spat upon. Some might consider that a step down. I do not consider that a step down for a Jewish person to be spat upon because they are Jewish. Any person, but certainly for that reason. And even if they don't want to pursue that specific instance, that isolated instance, that campus may be a place where multiple situations and incidents like this are happening. And a Title VI complaint looks, maybe at a specific program, but it can also look at the entire campus climate and say, what's happening on the campus? This student may have had this incident. This unrelated student who doesn't even know this, this one may have had a different incident. So they all need to be reported so that we have a clear picture of what is the campus climate at that particular school, so that the administration can be on notice of everything that is happening. But now, beyond just the legal,
Let me just interrupt for 1 second. That's a
Yeah.
great point, because what might seem to one student to be just an isolated thing, it turns out what you're saying is, if we find out that this is going around and it's epidemic in a campus, then perhaps it deserves attention. But where is it that kind of incident should be reported? I'm still just having a little trouble.
again, you can.
Is there a central clearinghouse or what?
If you fill out, that's one of the things this consortium now. So the ADL has been tracking these together with Hillel, but this information now will be, because what's at this website is a short form, and so all of these incidents are being now tracked.
That's one legal-protection.org.
That's legal-protection.org, and the responses also for the student will vary, right? As I say, some of them may be that the student, there's a letter that should be sent to the university. Sometimes it's giving the student some kind of talking points for a meeting that they should have. Sometimes it rises to the level of a Title VI administrative complaint. Sometimes it may rise to the level of what should be a federal lawsuit. We don't know. I will also say, in order to protect some of the students, what the Brandeis Center now has created is you can join the Brandeis Center as a member. So we have a non-voting membership group. We've created a group that's called Jewish Americans for Fair Education, JAFE. And so students who are concerned about this kind of anti-Semitism, parents who are concerned, alumni who are concerned, can join JAFE. And JAFE is now also a vehicle that can be used, if we need, in terms of litigation, to bring litigation on behalf of individuals like this who are concerned about these issues, students like this, without having to disclose individual student names. So that's another option that's being developed out there to help protect.
So this switch, I want to go ahead, Carly, then I want to go to the next question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if I could just switch from the legal for just a second. As I said, I know a lot of students, get in a situation and their first thought is not, I want a legal response, right? It's, I want support. So one of the other things that I haven't mentioned, and I'd be remiss if I didn't, about that's so tremendously helpful about Standwithus, is we have a huge campus presence, right? We have a campus department with staff who are working day in, day out with the students on campus, similar to what Lauren and her team at ICC do. And in fact, often in coordination with Lauren and her team, to provide students with that support. So a student comes to a Standwithus staffer on campus, right? And that staffer, may have 5 campuses that they oversee, and they are tracking every single incident that is reported to them on that campus. So again, that's how we are tracking to know, okay, this is a particularly problematic campus right now. What all needs to happen? Our campus department needs to get with Lauren and ICC staff and make sure that this student has the support on the ground that he or she needs, right? Whether that's, getting together in a group, having a Shabbat, doing a unity Shabbat, something like that. But then if there is something beyond that, an administrative letter, then, my department and the legal department would come in. If there's a legal action that needs to be taken that either we are going to take, or that, we don't have the resources right now, then maybe we go to Alyza and say, hey, we've got a student who, this is what we're doing with them. Can you help with this? But so again, there's a kind of a spectrum of support services that are available. Right. We are tracking, as I know ICC is, what's happening on each and every campus to make sure that we are aware of where those real problem spots are.
Great. I want to go, Jason Herman just put a wonderful question in the chat here, and that is that we're talking about responses to anti-Semitism. And maybe this is something, Lauren and or Carly, you might be able to speak to this a little bit, but what about in a proactive kind of a way? Is there any work to check in terms of, first of all, we, there are a couple of universities which just seem to be tone deaf, and the administrators are tone deaf. There are other ones where they seem to be sensitive. So one of the questions is, what can be done before an incident like this happens, or to try and even change the dynamics that are on the campus? Lauren, I'll go to you first on that.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And just like Carly said, we have a whole team of regional directors and deputy regional directors who are working on campuses across the country. So they're like our first line to building relationships with students. We have an ICC fellowship where we have 80 student fellows at 80 different campuses across the country who are doing a lot of that, like relationship building, getting students elected to positions of leadership on campus so that, when a BDS resolution is brought through student government, we already have allies in place, and we're already have a seat at the table so that we are, not just like working from behind. So that's one of the proactive things that we do. We're also, I think, like we're investing a lot in outreach to groups and students beyond the traditional Jewish communal groups. So we have a national outreach director. We've been working with HBCUs, Christian colleges, et cetera, to try to kind of broaden the base of the pro-Israel movement, because I think we can all agree that we need allies right now more than ever. So that is something we're also working on. And our regional directors, just like Carly said, are the first line of defense, and so they're getting these calls from students. So maybe proactively, students are planning programming on campus, bringing speakers, things like that. And then we also have a really robust research department that's researching campus trends, so we see like where things are really picking up. We provide research to like a Hillel director or a Chabad rabbi or something else on campus.
And how about anything within the context of specific curriculum-based kinds of teachings? Some of the kid may sign up for a class that is history of Israel and the Middle East and find out that they're actually being, just indoctrinated with Edward Said's stuff. Any comments about that? Go ahead, Carly.
No, it's happening. It's been happening for decades, right? I mean, we are in the educational situation that we are in, and I won't even call it educational. I should call it indoctrinational setting that we're in because of the likes of Edward Said. And so one of the things curriculum wise, the reality is that academic freedom largely does protect what professors are teaching in the classroom, so long as it is germane to the subject matter of their class, right? I mean, there's very little that administrators can do to, kind of come in and oversee. It's not quite the same as like on a high school level where they can take a look at the teaching materials and the curriculum. There's a little more discretion there, much less so on the campus level. What we do though, is we help to educate the administrators, right? One of the things that Alyza mentioned earlier was the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IRA, definition of anti-Semitism. It's extremely important to us, and so we have an initiative where we work with the policymakers and the administrators so that they understand, right? And that includes DEI officials. As Alyza said, it's hard to get in with the DEI officials. They generally don't want to include Jews as the oppressed minority. But right now we are in a historic moment where I think the blinders are off, and there's very, very little opportunity for them to say with a straight face that Jews are not being oppressed, certainly on their campuses. And so educating them about what does contemporary anti-Semitism look like? Why should you use the IRA definition? How can you use it in a manner that is consistent with your obligations under the Free Speech Clause of the First Amendment, but also to make sure that you are not allowing anti-Semitism to become a part of the indoctrination that is happening in classrooms? So again, I think that's an extremely important tool. And so that, among other things, we're educating about Jewish identity. What does it look like? What do attacks against that identity look like? So that it's not again, as we said before, it's not this is just a political discourse. No, these are identity-based attacks, and administrators need that understanding.
Alyza, go ahead.
Just to build on what Carly was saying, the departments, right, the faculty in the departments, universities need to make sure that they are cracking down hard and not allowing them to use the university's name, the university's logo, right? If they want to express their own personal opinion, that's one thing, but they should not be doing this in the name of the university. And the universities have every right and ability to make sure that that's not happening. And they need to start ensuring that they're not, because they're abusing that privilege right now. The other thing is that when you get students in the classroom with these faculty, the faculty are not allowed to harass or abuse the students, right? They may teach things that in a way that the students don't like, but if the students push back, if the students express a different opinion, I mean, when Lauren was talking, for instance, about the student who was ridiculed in front of the class for his, having been connected to AIPAC, there's certain behavior that crosses the line, and a professor that then either silences a student, bullies a student, doesn't call on a student once they know, right? If the student's never allowed, that is not, again, that student is now arguably being denied that equal educational opportunity. They are being discriminated against in that classroom. And if you have students like that whose Jewish identity is being demeaned by the professor, that crosses a line also that is actionable.
And, sorry, I was just going to say some of the responsive things. I know the question went to, these are all responsive things. What about proactive things? Some of the responsive things that are happening right now are actually turning into proactive things, that are forward looking. For example, notifying administrations of the problems with their SJP, their Students for Justice in Palestine chapter, and asking them to take a look at the activities of that organization and make sure that either they line up with the values and the obligations of student chapters, or if they don't, that those student chapters be disbanded. And we've seen already that the governor of Florida has ordered that all SJP chapters on Florida campuses be disbanded. Brandeis University has followed suit with that. Fordham has.
I want to come back to the SJP in a moment. Before I do, though, can I ask a question here? It might be a little bit controversial, and that is, and is there a sense in any of the research that any of you have done that some of this is coming from foreign sources, and that there may be recourse to start to look at student visas that have been overextended, et cetera? You know what I'm saying, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I can't say that that's an area. Lauren, go ahead. If that's something that you guys have looked at, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know our research team has been, working with tracking activities of the kind of community organizations who are funneling money and things into propping up these SJP chapters across the country. And it's certainly, as much as they portray that they're grassroots, it's certainly not grassroots. We know that there is an international funding network, and all of these groups are connected and sharing resources and messaging and things like that. So certainly, there is, in terms of, I'll leave it to the lawyers to talk about student visas and how this could impact them. But in terms of resources, it's certainly there, and it's been there, and it's been happening for years.
Yeah.
So using that as a segue then, there are a couple of, just yesterday we heard that, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Brandeis University is the first to say that Students for Justice in Palestine are not going to be allowed on campus. Can you share with us on what basis they were able to do that? So perhaps some of us can learn from some of the things that we may want to share with our students to strategies or things to be aware of or what to look for.
There was a letter that that Brandeis Center, our organization, together with the Anti-Defamation League, with the ADL, sent to 200 university presidents, saying that now we had felt and we saw that Students for Justice in Palestine, particularly in connection with this toolkit that we've discussed, crossed a line. They were no longer just saying these are ideas that we support, right? We're critical of Israel. They now were saying that they were, first of all, quoting language from terror websites, from terror talking points. And they were basically saying, we are part of this resistance, and everything we do now is to further the resistance. And we had students who were saying, we are Hamas. So in other words, they have now crossed the line from just supporting on the outside to basically saying, this is now our mission and our goal. And the work that we are doing is to further this goal. So then what we were advising universities is that they should take a look, because there are cases that suggest you can be providing material support for terror. It doesn't have to be money. It can be providing this kind of organized PR effort, right? Which is what they are doing. And that could also potentially be considered material support. And so what we were saying is take a look at these organizations and enforce your own codes of conduct. And you should not be, right, authorizing groups that are providing material support for terror, that have gone and crossed this line, to operate on your campus. That's something that your codes should, and them already do, prohibit.
And I think this is a perfect opportunity to underscore, something that we've been saying all along, which is that these are concerted efforts. The work that each of our organizations is doing it's all essential. On October 11th, we Standwithus sent a letter to thousands of university administrators across the country, alerting them to this exact thing, right? To this SJP, this national SJP toolkit, and some of the very rhetoric that Alyza just highlighted that's in there, and the way that Students for Justice in Palestine chapters, the local chapters on their campuses, were taking this up and showing how they were using this rhetoric in the very demonstrations that were taking place on these campuses, and asking for the exact same thing, saying this cannot all be protected speech. You have to take a look at this. So when one organization steps up and says something, okay, that's important. And then when another one comes behind and says, hey, this is a real problem. And then when you have the moral clarity and leadership of a governor like in Florida who says no more on our campuses, right? It gains momentum. And so now Brandeis University has said no more on our campus. So again, that's what it takes, is for all of us who are like-minded, who understand the reality of what is happening on campus and what needs to be done to protect students on campus, using our voices, lending our voices to we're finally now getting into a consistency of messaging.
Well, that's one of my questions in terms of, are there any, bright spots, places of hope? I understand the president of University of Florida came out with a very strong statement condemning what Hamas had done, unequivocal, and that really set a tone. Van Sassy, if I'm not mistaken, and that then the other Florida State University and other colleges there came out with equally supportive statements. So, and is there cause for, do you think we're going to win this battle? Is there cause for, it just seems as if the other side is so entrenched, so well financed, so well organized, and so spread out. Sometimes it just seems to me to be overwhelming. That's why we came with the title that all hell is breaking loose on college campuses.
Here's my 2 cents, just for what it's worth. Every time that something like this happens, the other side overplays its hand, and they've done that in large part here. And it is why people like the University of Florida president and spoke up and said, enough is enough. There is no moral equivalence here, right? There is no two sides to this, and outright, unequivocally condemned Hamas and said, not just I condemn Hamas, but anyone else who has a moral fiber in their body has to do the same, right? This is not difficult. This is really simple. And he called upon university administrators to do that. And they are now beginning to do that. There is a statement that over 100 university administrators have signed that supports Israel and condemns Hamas. Were they slow to do so because of this, kind of fear of, oh, are we getting into the realm of free speech? And yes, some of them were slow to do so, but they're beginning to do it now. They're beginning to see the real evils and dangers of groups like SJP. So again, are we going to win this? I think the answer is we have no option otherwise, right? This is a battle for for our students on campus to have the same rights as everyone else has on campus. Is it going to be a long, hard fight? Yes, it has been, and it's just continuing. And so again, I think that yes, we're seeing those rays of light. There's lots of work to be done. Still, there's lots of education that needs to take place. That's what we're doing. We're making sure that people understand the realities and can clear away, all of these red herrings. But I'm not deterred. I don't think Alyza's deterred. I don't think that Lauren is deterred. This is a unifying and clarifying moment. And I think that there's.
I'm going to go to Lauren. Wait, I want to go to Lauren and then Alyza give you the closing comments. Please, Lauren. Advice, comments for our rabbis. This is, a couple of weeks. Many of us will have college students coming home. So anything you'd like to share with us before we go, and then we'll give it to Alyza to wrap and share her closing thoughts.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I want to agree with Carly, and we are going to keep fighting, and I do think we will win, but we have to be unified, and we have to work together. And I think, this is great that you have this call and everyone coming together. And I think if you have college students who you're working with, we've put a couple of resources in the chat, the resources to reach out to Alyza's team and Carly's team. And we have our community hotline where any student or community member can, if they need help with something on a campus, they can text the phone number and they can get, we have people monitoring the line 24/7, and we can connect you either. Maybe it's sending you to Alyza or Carly, or maybe it's connecting a student with our regional director who works at that campus to make sure that they have the support.
And what is that community hotline?
I put it in the chat. I'll put it there again. It's a phone number. All you have to do is text, and you'll get straight away connected to us. So we had that up. We uploaded that a couple of weeks ago, right after the war started. So
Thank
we're
you.
monitoring that, in real time. And so that's what I would say. I would say, like, get them connected. Make sure that they feel like they have support. They're all feeling, like I said, really alone and scared. And I mean, I think we want them to know that they're not alone, that they have support. There are resources. There are people like, Alyza, Carly, and myself who are, and many, many, many more who are working almost all the time to try to make sure they have the support, and that, ultimately, I do think we'll win. It's going to be a hard fight. And by the way, like, everyone, this isn't just students, it's alumni, it's donors, like, everyone, there has to be a cost. And I think some universities are starting to see that there will be a cost for not protecting Jewish students. And if you're an alumni of a university, if you're a donor to a university, if you have congregants who are donors to universities, I think sending that message home that, like, not $1 more unless you are committed to protecting your Jewish students.
Thank you. And then, Alyza, please, can you share with us your take on everything and your, closing comments, please?
We are definitely going to win this. We're definitely going to win this, not just here, but more broadly. And the answer is because of the unity. It is remarkable, and I'm sure this group thinks about it. When you think about 5 weeks ago, how the people of Israel and the Jews in Israel, we were tearing our people apart. And now to see how the people in Israel have come together, to even see how you had Yom Kippur, secular and religious, at each other's throats, and now you have members of the Haredi community that are enlisting in the IDF. You have conversations happening. You have, I see throughout the United States, not only on campus, Jews who had not been thinking about their Jewish identity much at all, now not only thinking about their Jewish identity, but feeling that connection to Israel that was buried so deep, deep, deep inside. Suddenly now, after October 7th, they watched that in horror, and they felt that those are their people, right? We are all connected. We are all part of the Am Yisrael. We are all part of the people of Israel. And I see that unity as the shining light. The experiences and what we're going through is the worst. It is so painful and so difficult, and yet I have no doubt that the Jewish people will come through this stronger and more united than we have been in a very, very long time. And while there's going to be a dark time in between, I am very confident that we will make it through to the light at the end. And so, yes, that's where I think we're headed.
Beautiful. Well, I want to thank you and thank all of our participants, both those who were our panelists and those who were here to listen. I think a great, we will send something out with the resources that were mentioned. And our next call, just to remind everyone, will be next Thursday. That will be with David Bernstein, talking about how the left was lost and talking about the whole crisis in the progressive community and the relations that between the Jewish community and the progressive organizations. I was going to call that one, how the hell do we lose the left? But I figured, I used hell once, that was enough. But hopefully we will prevail and come through this even stronger. Halavai, that your words will be true, Alyza. To all our rabbis, thank you for all you do and being on the front lines. Thank you to our three panelists, to Carly, Alyza, and to Lauren for all they do as well. And hopefully we'll look forward to seeing everyone next Tuesday in Washington. Until then, take care. Thank you very much.